Final Fantasy XIV has had a bit of a controversy for a while now, and I thought I would talk about a point of view I don't see many people discussing. To give you an idea, the main talking point I see the community discussing is that healing is too boring, there's nothing to do, and to fix it, the solution is that we need more damaging abilities to press. While I don't think that is necessarily a bad idea, it is not the one I would personally go with. I don't think that is the direction the game should go down. I think we need to go the other direction, away from the DPS first, heal second mentality. Instead of just adding more DPS buttons to press, Square Enix needs to make healing harder, and or healers and tanks need to be pruned a bit to accomplish that. Healers and tanks have way too many tools to prevent damage in my opinion, but the little amount of healing is actually required in most fights. That is why healing feels rather trivial at times. I think fights need to require you to actually utilize your entire toolkit to heal, and not just rely solely on mitigation and OGCDs to survive. A great example of this is the Omega Protocol. Greatest content currently in the game can and has been cleared without a single healer. While I know this is nowhere near the norm and a very niche example, the fact that it can be done with some planning speaks volumes to how much mitigation and self-sustain can really make healers feel incredibly useless at times. Before we get into this, let me tell you a little about myself if you don't know much about me. Until the past year and a half or so, I played Final Fantasy XIV casually since the realm had born. I didn't really delve into the extremes, savages, and ultimates until Endwalker. I was mainly a do the MSQ and new trials and then unsub until the next patch type of player. While I was playing this game casually, I was raiding Mythic content in World of Warcraft, a game I've been playing since I was 16 years old. I'm 35 now, by the way. If you don't know what type of content that is, think of it as something harder than Savage, but easier than most ultimates. I played a healer, melee DPS, ranged DPS, caster, and even some tanking back in the day, clearing all the content in the hardest difficulty before the tier was finished. So as someone who has healed card content before in WoW, where I'm almost constantly healing during a fight, it was a bit weird coming to this game where this game incentivizes you to heal as little as possible and spend most of your time spamming your main DPS ability. As of right now, I have cleared top, T, and most recently Uwu, as well as all the Savage tiers, Extreme, and Criterion Dungeon. Basically any high content this game has to offer, I have cleared it, or I'm in the process of clearing it. My goal being to get Pentalegend before Dawn Trail, which seems very possible at the moment. I mention this specifically because healing the older ultimates really opened my eyes, and it came as a bit of a shock to me how different it is compared to today. It was surprising to me that I actually had to regen the tanks. I had to actually watch their health almost the entire fight, which is something I never have to do in today's content. Even in top, the hardest fight, not just in this game, but personally in any MMO I've ever played, I almost never had to pay attention to the health or keep an eye on them or anything like that. So with that being said, I can see why people just want more complex DPS rotations for healers. The game seems to be pushing players towards that type of playstyle. However, the tools for doing that seem a bit lackluster. Healers, for the most part, just have their one spammable single target DPS button, one dot, one AoE ability, which is rarely used in raids, and one hard-hitting single target / AoE ability, like White Mage's Misery or Sage's Phlegma, for example. So if the game is trying to push this DPS first, heal second playstyle, then why are the healing jobs in particular so simple to play? I'm going to focus mainly on White Mage and a bit of Sage for this video because those are the two jobs I know the most about. And according to FF logs, they are also the most popular in all forms of content by a wide margin. White Mage is also memed on quite a bit, people typically calling it a glare mage, and they aren't too far off to be honest. But if people are so opposed to how boring healing is, why are White Mage and Sage, undoubtedly the two easiest healer jobs to play, so much more popular? Well, this may sound common sense, but it's because the majority of people will just play the easier job. It's that simple. Do I have to worry about drawing cards, buff timings, delayed healing, spread low, parry management, and all that as a White Mage or a Sage? No. I basically don't have to pre-plan or manage barely anything to heal effectively. And my DPS is just as good, if not better, than an Astro. So why would I put all this extra work for the same or slightly lesser result? It seems to me most players don't want something overly complex DPS wise when they're healing. They just want something to do. The more complex healing jobs are already there in Scholar and Astro, but yet they are still the least represented in all forms of content. So to combat this problem, why not just make the healing itself harder and more interesting? When I say that, I don't mean to take WoW's approach where almost every boss encounter is a constant ticking dot on everyone that ramps up over time, which they love to overuse, or just constant instances of damage to random players every now and then from a ticking debuff. WoW's hardest content is also designed for 20 players, and not 8, so the amount of things you can do based on 2 healers is limited compared to the 4 to sometimes even 6 healers that WoW has depending on the fight. While that is something I think that can fit into 14, a good example being J-Waves on T, that isn't something that should be used constantly. I think a really nice heal mechanic is something like Program Loop in Phase 1 of Top. Now as a healer, my only worry is healing people who have to soak towers number 3 and number 4 because of the debuff they have from previously from a tether that puts them to 1% health. This actually takes some coordination between the healers, especially since as a white mage, I don't have enough lilies built up at that point to handle this mechanic solely using Rapture or Solace, or even Benison. On occasion, I had to actually use a Cure 2 to heal people. Shocking, I know. But this mechanic is made significantly easier if one or both tanks are soaking towers number 3 or 4, instead of DPS and healers. The tanks can easily heal themselves back up enough to where I don't even need to heal them. I only need to worry about 2 people, drastically reducing difficulty of healing while also doing my own mechanic properly. Speaking of tanks, let's talk a little bit about healing tanks first. I think healers and tanks have way too much mitigation. It has gotten so bad that 99% of the time, I don't even glance at the tank's health anymore in current content. A Sage's Karya almost negates worrying about one tank's health, and the other one has so much mit and self-sustain you don't have to worry about them either. For example, if I tried to not heal the tanks in WoW, they would just fall over rather quickly. Tanks in 14 are all too self-sustainable, with warriors being the most egregious. Is there a tank buster coming? Just invuln it. Your invuln's down? Just kitchen sink it. Everything will be back up by the time you need to take a tank buster again anyway. Your off tank has the same tricks you do and can broke it off and do the same thing. The autos, for most part, don't do enough damage that you nearly need mitigation for it. Don't have all your mits back? It's fine. I got Aquavale, Benison, which are both off to GCD because God forbid I have to stop DPSing in order to heal your ass. While I do think tank mitigation is a part of the reason I think healing is boring, I don't think it's the main culprit really. Let's talk about raid-wide damage. As long as you mitigate properly, there's our word again, you barely need to heal to top people back up before the next instance of damage. From my personal experience, 1 or 2 raptures is usually enough. The raid-wide damage is so few and far in between in most fights that there's no rush to get the raid top back up. Bleed damage coming? Just plop down a bell and keep DPSing. Raid damage happened that nothing else is happening for almost a minute? Just Asylum and keep DPSing. Hard hitting raid wide? Temperance and Rapture. Then keep DPSing. In fact, I will give SC props for this. The way lilies work and how they incentivize you to heal so you get closer to a big juicy misery every time is great. I love seeing those 100k or more crit miseries every time I press it. It's kind of sad though that the only way to encourage people to actually heal in this game is to reward them with a big dig damage spell once they do it enough times. You occasionally throw a Medica 2 in the mix, which is fine, but the community sentiment seems to be more GCD heals you use, the worse of a player you are. The community hates the GCD heal for some reason in my experience. I guess parsing culture has something to do with it, which I give 0 fucks about personally. Well, that's not entirely true. I do care about my healing parts if I'm being honest. I consider myself to be a very safe healer. I will cast Medica 2 if I think we need it. And I've gotten comments from other healers sometimes saying that I never need to do that. However, I've had many instances where if I don't, the raid doesn't get topped back up before we take damage again, and we die. Meanwhile, I see them casting Dosis or Broil while we are about to die. There are no DPS checks in this game if you aren't a week 1 clearer, and even then, that's debatable. If anything, my static has to slow down or stop DPS on every fight to not push it too quickly, which is arguably more annoying even in top. In that 6-phase fight, we have to stop DPS in every single phase in order to make sure our cooldowns line up properly for when we need them in the next one. If we push too quickly, odds are we will have to wipe. There are some rare exceptions to that rule this tier, however, the obvious one being Harrowing Hell and P10S, which Square Enix recently admitted that they actually went too hard on the raid-wide damage and it wasn't meant to be that hard to heal. Yoshi P, please, I want that to be the norm. I think most healers do. It doesn't have to be as demanding as harrowing in every single fight, but I love to heal. That's why I'm playing this job. If you coordinate with your co-healer well enough, you don't need to tank LB3 to survive that, but most groups do it anyway. Why? The only reason tank LB3 is used there is because you have babied your healer so hard that when a mechanic comes along that they actually requires big healing, they don't know how to handle it. There needs to be more mechanics like this more often. It doesn't have to be as brutal for a savage fight, especially the second boss, but I wouldn't tone it down too much more. Something like that in an ultimate fight where you don't even have LB3 available yet would be so fun for me personally. Maybe there is something like that DSR. Let me know in the comments if there is. Another example from an ultimate I've done recently is J-Waves. It was something I had never really seen since harrowing. I actually have to heal my ass off so the group doesn't die. If I try to sneak a glare in there, especially towards the end where the stacks are really high, it could cost us 1 or even 2 people to die, which actually did happen one pull. My bad, drone. I had less tools to use, so I actually had to dust off the old Cure 3 to keep up with the healing. Do I even use Cure 3 on any content today? Maybe one time in P6 of top. I can't remember any time I used it in Savage at all. What about Cure 2? Does anyone even remember that spell exists? Or Cure 1 even? You have harder heal checks and content from years ago when we have less tools to deal with it than we do today. With all the tools we have available to us today, you would expect things to hit much harder than they do and more often, but yet they don't. Why is that the case? Another ultimate I cleared recently was Uwu. I had a great time healing that. The tanks didn't need as much love as they did for T, but it was still enough where I had to regen them every now and then and prep for Titan's tank busters. Healing friction with cleansing in P1 was fun to try and time my heals so they would go off the instant the raid took damage. Healing the nails on Ifrit when I had Searing Wind was a fun mechanic. Making good use of Cure 3, plus using my Lilies and Benison to keep myself topped while I'm out of the party. Titan phase is a bit too easy to heal, to be honest. The tumults don't really hit too hard, and one Asylum plus a Medica 2 is more than enough to keep everyone alive. Ultimate phase had a great amount of healing personally. There are constant AoEs going off throughout the phase with shared stacking, Titan AoE, Garuda AoE, tank purges, etheric boons, popping orbs. It's quite a lot actually now that I think about it. To summarize, I think Square Enix should be making these fights hit harder and more often to utilize more GCD healing. Make us actually have to heal tanks every now and then. I think they have a good amount of healer mechanics already in the game and a decent variety of them too. They just need to hit harder and be more often. If healers are bored, I don't think making them DPS more is the way to go. Seems to be the polar opposite of what the definition of a healer really is. I love healing and raiding this game despite how it feels right now. Do I wish healing was a bit harder? Obviously. Am I going to quit the game if it stays the way it is? No. I would actually be more tempted to quit if healers got a quote-unquote DPS rotation, which I don't think Square Enix will ever do. If anything, based on the recent rework of Summoner, they seem to be going the opposite direction and making jobs easier to play. I am playing a healer because I don't want to DPS. DPS in this game for most jobs is still rather intimidating to me, and I think most players feel that way. If you look at the most played jobs per their respective role, you will see the same jobs every time. White Mage, Sage, Dancer, Summoner, Reaper are usually what you will find, because they're just flat out easier to play. Now, I'm not saying there is anything wrong with that, but to say that players want more complexity added to their jobs, it doesn't seem to be true when you really look at the numbers. Anyway, that's all the thoughts I have for today. If you made it this far, thanks for watching the video. Let me know in the comments what you think Square Enix should do about healing. Did they even change anything? If you enjoyed, please consider giving it a like. If you didn't, downvote the shit out of it, and I promise I will try to do better next time. Don't forget to subscribe for more gaming content, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios, boys.